Hey, how's it going, everybody? Today we are going to be taking a look at a new for the North American market dash cam system, the FineVu GX33. Now, the FineVu GX33 was sent to me courtesy of blackboxmycar.com, who is going to be carrying this later this August 2022. And this system, if we can zoom in here, you can see, is marketed as a full-featured 1080 resolution class dash cam. So that means this is going to be competing against other, let's say more premium level dash cams such as the Thinkware F200 or the BlackView DR590X, also in that 1080 resolution class. So it'll be interesting to see how this stacks up against those two well-established players in the market. And this is FineVu is another Korean dash cam company, just like BlackView and Thinkware. So I have pretty high expectations. Alright, so let's take a look at what you get with the FineVu GX33 package. Starting in the upper left here, we have our mount for the front camera, and then we have the GPS receiver. So what that means is this unit does not have GPS receiver built into it. Sometimes that can be done for packaging or space reasons. Other times it can be done for thermal reasons. Either way, if you don't want to have something else on your windshield, you don't have to plug in the GPS and you don't have to use it. Below that we have the main camera unit itself. So this is the hub that everything else plugs into. It's a nice solid feeling unit. Below that we have the hardwire kit. So this comes with a hardwire kit. It doesn't come with a 12 volt like cigarette lighter adapter, right? So one of these guys here, this is an optional thing you can purchase. So this is set up for a hardwire install, and this cable is 4 meters long, which means if you have a rear-based fuse box, like a lot of BMWs do, for sedan, this might just be barely long enough. So to be safe, I would recommend asking your dash cam vendor to build you an extended hardwire cable. So blackboxmycar.com, they offer this service for all of their hardwire kits. I've purchased these from them myself for my own BMWs, and they work perfectly. So there is a solution out there. To the right of the hardwire cable, we have the rear camera cable, and this is a healthy 6 meters long, so you shouldn't have an issue reaching the back there. And one thing I found a little bit interesting is they use this TRRS, or tip and ring audio style plug, instead of a more common USB type, but that's not really a big issue. Above that we have the rear camera, and as you can see, the rear camera is in its mount. It comes that way, and it has its pigtail right there. And then to the right we have some documentation. So we have the installation and use, a quick start manual essentially. Then we have the more detailed manual. And on top of that, one of the things I really thought was interesting or nice about this package is that it includes a Samsung Pro Endurance Line 32 gigabyte memory card. So, very high quality memory there. Something that I would purchase myself. Sure, it'd be nice if the size was a little bit larger on the card. But, once again, this is also only a 1080 class dash cam. So that may give you sufficient storage. And then finally above that we have extra mounts, and cable clips, for tightening things up around your installation. So one thing I will also mention about the power plug on the hardwire kit, this is the same plug that Thinkware uses on their dash cams. So if you have, a Thinkware, branded hardwire kit, or the cigarette 12 volt adapter, that will work perfectly fine. And this is actually convenient for me since I have Thinkware cameras in my cars, which means I can just unplug the Thinkware and plug this in when I go put it in the car for testing. I don't have to run any new wires. So let's talk about the main camera unit itself. You can see it's a square profile. The lens is offset, so when you place it in the car later, you're going to want to keep that in mind, so that this is a little bit more centered. And the other thing that means is, since this is over here, from our view on the left side of the camera, that means if you want to center this, then you'll probably mount the camera to the left of the the rear view mirror, so meaning the driver's side for a left-hand drive car. Normally I put a lot of the cameras over on the right side, so they're kind of hidden behind the view of the mirror to the driver. So this will be a little bit different in that regard, but that's not a big issue or major detail. On the top of the camera here, we can see we have all of our connections. Over on the left we have our power, then we have our rear camera connection. This is the mount for the windshield mount, and then over on the right we have the GPS. On the rear of the camera we have, you can see like a microphone or a little speaker, a status LED, and then 3 buttons. One is says volume, the middle one says record, and then Wi-Fi. These also all have status lights on them, and a lot of these buttons, they have dual modes. So they have a quick press mode, right? So if you just quick press the volume, it'll change the volume of the speaking it does. If you press and hold the volume for like 2 seconds, I believe it toggles between the microphone being active or not. Likewise with record, one quick press, I think it does a quick manual record. So hey, I have an event I want to record or want to save, just hit that once. If you press and hold this twice, it'll format the memory card. And then on the right side we have Wi-Fi, which press once to turn on and off the Wi-Fi. I believe if you press and hold that twice, then if you press and hold that, then it will reboot the unit. So decently intuitive. And over here on the left side of the unit, we have this little slider. And I thought this was just a lock for the memory card, because when this is in the down position, then the memory card can't pop out. However, it says on and off here, and this is the on and off switch for the unit. So you can only take the memory card out when the unit is off. So that's kind of a nice little protection there. However, even if the switch is set to on, you could still press this memory card here and have it disengage, and then watch it pop out when you slide this over to the off position. Another thing to note is the memory card does come pre-installed in the unit itself. I was looking around the package for it initially. I couldn't find it, and then looked on the camera, was like, oh, there it is. And then on the bottom we have some venting and speaker stuff. Pretty self-explanatory there. Nothing too exciting. So when you first power up the camera, one of the things it will have you do is it will have you format the memory card. It'll give you an audio prompt to format the memory card, and if you haven't read the manual, you probably won't know what to do. So when that happens, you'll just hit this record button and hold it down for 2 seconds, and then it'll give you an audio prompt telling you it's going to format the memory card. And if you don't do that, then it'll keep giving you that voice prompt to format the memory card until it just decides, hey, no one's here, no one's home, I'm going to just shut myself off. Okay, so let's go ahead and power this unit up, and I'll show you the app that's required to configure it. And I have a hardwire kit just plugged into a 12-volt power supply. So that's how I usually, do this over here on the bench before putting it in the car. Once again, because this doesn't include that 12-volt cigarette, adapter, it is a little bit more difficult to set up because it means you would have to run your hardwire, or at least, plug your hardwires into your fuse box just to set the thing up. So it would be nice if they included that 12-volt adapter right off the bat, or you can always purchase one for not too much in order to make setup a little bit easier. So anyways, I am going to turn the unit on.
Starting video recording. Please check the rear camera connection.
And you can see this thing has a pretty pleasant voice. It's not like another camera that I reviewed that had a very ominous and very serious tone voice.
Users connected.
So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on the Wi-Fi.
Connect FineVu Wi-Fi.
Then I'll go ahead and grab my phone, which I've already opened up the FineVu app on, and I'll go to connect dash cam. And then I'll connect to the FineVu. I've already done the initial setup on this where it asks you a couple questions, but essentially, it asks you questions of what model what model type the camera is, and then tells you to just do the same here, connect to it.
FineVu connected.
And then you can see it's prompting me right now to see if I want to do a firmware update on the camera. It doesn't really matter. I'm just going to do this later. Okay, now that we are on the home page of the dash cam, you can see that there's a live view here, which of course, since I have the camera face down on the table, it's not going to show me. But if I take that off, then well, we can see what the dash cam can look at and see here. So this is a pretty clean interface in my opinion, and I really like that. It's not like it doesn't look like a kid developed it, but at the same time it's very clean and intuitive, right? We have our dash cam files here.
Playback mode.
Right?
Stopping video recording.
And you can hear the audio prompts very clear and friendly from the camera, and you can see all your other video files to look at.
Starting video recording.
Then we can go to our settings down here.
Stopping video recording.
And we can change everything. So, just right off the bat, you have some quick settings, right? You can go change the time. You can change the volume of the sound.
4. Sound off. 1, 2, 3.
And then we can turn the microphone
Voice recording
on and off.
Voice recording on.
And it's really nice that the camera just gives you these prompts right away, so you know what you've done. Up top we have environment, so this is your password, your speed, your security LED, how you want to set that.
Changes have been applied.
You can see once again it gives you another audio prompt. We have our camera settings. Since I don't have the rear camera plugged in, the rear stuff doesn't really matter right now, but I can go ahead and plug that in later and configure it. We have the HDR, so high dynamic range video. And then you can do your memory card. It's got this nice little visual down here showing you what percentage of the memory card is partitioned to what. So we have driving, driving event, parking motion, and parking event. And using these 4 preset profiles, we can change the allocation of that, right? So if I want event only, it changes that way, driving only, and so forth. And then we can set overwrite protection, which means when it fills the memory card, it's not going to overwrite the oldest file with the newest one. I don't really have a need for that, so I'm not going to turn either of those on. But what it looks like is, it highlights it. And then the next one, we have the record settings. So this is, up here we have our driving and parking recording settings tab. So we're on the driving now, right? Standard, because I just wanted to do its full 30 FPS, which I wish it could do 60, because 60 is a lot nicer for capturing movement. But this isn't, the super high tier of, high resolution camera and so forth. Then we have the event sensitivity. So this is like when you're driving, if it feels a certain G motion, it'll save an event. I don't really like using that because things like speed bumps or dips in the road on the freeway or whatever can set it off. And then we can set a recording quality, and I think this is equivalent to bit rate. So obviously higher is better. Next we have the parking recording side of things, and it's basically all the exact same settings. Event sensitivity, you do want this to be higher on your parking recording, because if something bumps your car, you want to be able to find it out. And then it also has motion sensitivity, because I have the motion profile. In motion profile, a motion going across the camera or a G sensor impact will set off the recording, and it records something like 10 seconds before and 10 seconds after. So that's basically the default that you would want. And then so for motion sensitivity, obviously you don't want to set too sensitive, because then it'll just give you a bunch of false positives. So I usually like to set it a little bit more towards the lower end. Below that we have the ADAS, which is Advanced Driver Aid Safety. What this stuff is these are smart driving aids, kind of like your driving assistant and so forth, that your vehicle might come with or can be optioned. So over here we have your forward vehicle moving assistant. So this basically tells you if the vehicle in front of you starts taking off at a green light and you're playing around on your phone, you don't notice it, it'll tell you. Your on-time notification, It'll record kind of where you are and where you're going. Your speed camera notification, so hey, if it'll look for speed signs and tell you if you're going too fast. And your driving rest notification, which is, it has a timer that says, hey, every certain amount of time interval, you should stop and take a break. I find a lot of these things just really annoying and useless, so I don't use any of them. Below that we have power, and so this camera has a low voltage cutoff, which means when it's in parking mode, it's not going to drain your battery so low such that you can't start your car. So it has a bunch of different settings here, and these are pretty good settings. I find 11.6, 11.8 kind of useless because you don't really want your battery going that low, but 12 and 12.2, personally I like the 12.2. And then I guess if you have a hybrid vehicle, they have other things here, or if you have only auxiliary battery. So this is if you have like a cell link that you've got this hooked up to, you can tell it that. And then also it has a timer. So let's say you have a cell link or whatever, but you don't want to record more than a certain amount of time in parking mode. You can set that cutoff time down here. And then finally we have dash cam reset, which will reset the whole thing, but I have no need to do that now. So overall, I find the app to be very intuitive, simple. They haven't bombarded you with a bunch of complex settings, but at the same time, I feel like they've given you a good amount of control over this. So I think it's a really nicely balanced, and once again, it's a very clean, gooey, easy to use interface. So props to them on that. So one of the tests I do with all these cameras that have parking mode as well as a low voltage shutoff is to see how accurate that setting is. So for this test, I set the voltage within the app to auto shut off at 12 volts. And then using my power supply and multimeter, I varied the voltage to see when this would actually shut off. And this thing is pretty much right on the money. I set it to 12 volts and I saw this thing shut off at about 12.03 volts. So you can rest assured that this thing is not going to drain your battery, but still give you the parking mode that you're looking for. So good job to FineVu on there.
Alright, so we're on the freeway now, and on a particularly choppy piece of freeway, so lots of road noise. And I'd like to see what the sound recording quality difference is between the Thinkware and the new FineVu GX33. So yeah, does my stable workhorse Thinkware sound better, or does this new GX33 from FineVu set the bar? Alright, so we're on the freeway now, and on a particularly choppy piece of freeway, so lots of road noise. And I'd like to see what the sound recording quality difference is between the Thinkware and the new FineVu GX33. So yeah, does my stable workhorse Thinkware sound better, or does this new GX33 from FineVu set the bar? Okay, let's look at the daytime recording. Up top we have the FineVu GX33, and on the bottom is the Thinkware F800 Pro. I think immediately you can tell that the Thinkware has a greater level of contrast. We see deeper blacks and lighter light colors, but that doesn't really add to the picture quality, and I feel like with the FineVu you can see a lot more detail because those shadows aren't so covering. Another thing I noticed about the FineVu is like the logos, like on that FedEx truck there, are a little bit more clear, the edges, and just in general all of the edges on the FineVu are more clear. So it definitely has a better picture quality in my opinion, not quite as noisy of an image as the Thinkware is giving us. So I think I have to give the FineVu the edge here in terms of daylight quality, and if you look at some of these signs coming up too, I think you'll be able to better see them on the FineVu than the Thinkware. Okay, let's take a look at some nighttime footage now. So here we are going through a well-lit, kind of urban downtown area. And on the right side of the street, we have, pretty well lit pathway. On the left, it starts to get a little dark. Immediately, if you look at that, Pleasanton sign right there, the FineVu quality of the image is much better. Both of these cameras do a pretty good job on the periphery, if we look at the sidewalk area on the right. And I would say on the left, where it's a little bit darker, the FineVu actually illuminates that a bit better. You can make out the details. Like if we look at that gas station on the far left here, I would say it's pretty clear that the FineVu has a better image quality than the Thinkware does. So once again, props to FineVu here on this nighttime image quality. None of them are that great at reading, let's say, super fine details like the license plate of the car in front of us. But as we approach this light here, and we look at the street sign, you will see that one of these cameras is a little bit better to read that sign than the other. And stopping right here, we can see that it's interesting. The lit sign, the FineVu is a little bit easier to read, right? It's completely glared out on the Thinkware. But the sign above that, I would say the Thinkware is actually a little bit easier to read. Okay, in this next clip, we're going to see areas on the periphery being pretty dark, right? The street is somewhat lit, but this upcoming park and neighborhood on the left and right, really not well lit. Also, there's going to be a group of pedestrians jaywalking in this darkness. I don't think either camera really has much of an advantage in this scenario. I didn't notice the people earlier in one than the other, but we do see the Thinkware image is quite a bit noisier.
So all in all, how do I feel about the FineVu GX33? Well, I have to say, I'm honestly pretty impressed with this. One of the things that'll make me sour very quickly on a product is how easy or not easy it is to use. And the GX33 was one product where I really didn't feel like I struggled at all using this. It's simple enough to use and yet has the functionality you want. You don't have to click through a bajillion different menus to get to the settings. They didn't bombard you with so many extra settings. The app is nice and clean, very straightforward, self-explanatory. You don't have to read the manual to use it. And also, all these buttons on the back, they have enough functionality, so let's say 2 functions per button, but not so many that you have to read the manual each time, and the labels on them don't actually make sense or don't actually tell you what they do for what you would need to use most commonly. Another thing I'd have to say I really appreciated about the camera unit itself was that very quick, toggle for on and off. With my Thinkware F800 Pro and all the Thinkware line really, you got to press and hold the power button for 5 to 10 seconds to get to shut off. For this one, just flicking it to whatever position you want, walking off and not having to worry about it, ended up being very handy for my testing. If there was one area where I would say that they could improve on the usability of this, it would be to include that 12-volt cigarette lighter adapter, because then you can set this camera up without having to go through the whole hardwire process first. Aside from that, using this thing was so easy, and everything on this was quality, so I appreciated that as well. Now, if we get to the actual camera part of this, we saw, compared to my Thinkware F800 Pro, right, both of these Korean, Thinkware is a well-established brand, 1080 class cameras. The GX33 very clearly came out ahead, right? On the audio side, the processing was a little bit heavier on the GX33, but I think overall that led to a bit more pleasant experience. The Thinkware F800 Pro was very raw, and it actually made the audio, when you're listening to it after the fact, sound worse than it did in the car. So even though, let's say, not all the raw details were here, it was a smoother experience. And I would also say that image quality was smoother as well with this camera. We could see in the daylight recording sections how the GX33 had better detail, right? All the edges of the various cars and everything else in the image were smoother on here. They weren't choppy. There was less image noise overall. You could make out the signs and details, logos, etc. better. And also the image wasn't overly contrasted, right? The F800 Pro suffered there because the shadows, were so dark that it hid the details within them, versus the GX33 was just right. And then when we get to the nighttime recording, once again, the two cameras were mostly even on lit streets at night, right? Both had good peripheral vision. You could see what was kind of happening off to the sides. But still, once again, we saw how the GX33 had less image noise, some smoother edges, and less glare from street signs. So, this has turned out to be a pretty surprising product in my opinion. I was not expecting this to be as good as it was. And if we look at where this has been positioned in the market, it has been positioned in that kind of $150 to $200 range, which is the same as the Thinkware F200 Pro, which I would expect the performance to be pretty much the same as my F800 Pro. So not only have they given you an easy to use, well-performing 1080 class camera, they've also positioned it very competitively. So I do think that FineVu has a winning package here with the GX33 in that 1080 class camera. And if you're interested in picking one up, please check out blackboxmycar.com because they have just started selling these. They've listed them, and not only are they experts and great at what they do, fantastic customer service, but they almost always have the best price too.